Children and all of these people who are being killed and massacred, we don't matter. Get an IV line in him if you can. Hospitals are going to be bombed, we will continue to rebuild.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Gayle Tzemach Lemmon, and I'm really thrilled to be here with you tonight because I think Syria is the war in which adjectives have really seen their power extinguished. We can't think of anything worse to say about the war or any more of the carnage, but actually tonight we're going to talk about the hope and the healing, which are two words you don't usually put with the Syrian war. And what I want to do is first introduce an incredible doctor who has really been such brave, brave work, Dr. Rola Hallam.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And I want to start because before we talk about the war, so many times we see the rubble pictures and we think that's what Syria is. Mm-hmm. I've just come back Tuesday from Syria, and you were raised in a country that looked nothing like this rubble. So tell us, what do you think of when you think of the Syria of your childhood?
Gosh, I think of the smell of jasmine on my grandmother's balcony and walking through the winding souks of Damascus, smelling the herbs and spices and eating a really delicious falafel sandwich.
A very good falafel sandwich.
A really good falafel sandwich. And so my mom's from Damascus, my dad is from Homs. We were kind of a very rural peasant family, and so we were from a farming background, so we had a lot of fields that we used to run around and fall over and cut ourselves on and have a lot of fun with 20,000 cousins.
Yeah, lots of family. Right, and those of us from big families, we can appreciate all of that adventure. And then the war comes and everything changes, right? All of a sudden the country is grabbing headlines for reasons that have to do with bloodshed and loss. And you go back, instead of, as many people would do, going away from the conflict, you actually went toward the conflict. And tell us, when you first did your first medical mission, what was it that you found there on the ground?
Well, I think, very much like the panel before, I think we all face adversity, we all face problems, and you have to make a decision. Am I going to be part of the solution, or am I going to do something about it, or am I going to sit on the fence and ignore it? And as a doctor...
And you had a comfortable life at that moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I wanted to put my medical knowledge and skills to use, and so I joined the humanitarian effort and helped to co-found a charity called Hand in Hand for Syria, and so we'd go back and carry out medical missions, but we'd help to set up 6 hospitals in the north of the country, and really that whole time was working with various Syrian doctors, nurses, and aid workers, and was just completely shocked, actually, at what I'd seen, and not because of the death and devastation, but because I'd always sort of thought that it was the big charities that were going around saving the world. I didn't really realize that the reason people survived in crisis was because of the work of the people in crisis themselves.
Yeah.
You know, it was because Dr. Amina was like delivering women on her kitchen floor. It was because, you know what I mean? Like it was the people who were there who were helping each other, and I think people don't get to see that on the news. You assume, you know, we're victims who are sitting there with their hands out, waiting for a handout, but we're not. We're really busy helping ourselves and each other.
Well, and that victim narrative is so important to unwind, because what people don't know is that there are doctors risking their safety to go out and find injured children, that there are women who are midwives who are delivering babies in honestly circumstances you and I cannot imagine if Cedars is your local hospital, right? And so you see this, and the victim narrative fails to capture all these incredible stories. And I think as a storyteller, you meet just the most brave people full of grace and grit. And I wanted to give people a little bit of a picture of the grace and the grit that you showed. There was one mission in particular in Aleppo in 2013 that I would love to show all of you exactly what grace and grit is in action. If we can roll the tape, please, about the horror of what you witnessed in Aleppo.
Okay, here we have someone else. Okay,
Some kind of airstrike seems to have taken place. Most of the casualties are teenagers. They're saying a bomb has landed in their school playground.
It's just absolute chaos and carnage here. We've had a massive influx of what looked like serious burns.
This
yeah,
war
that still catches me sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, when you see that, right? I mean, this war is not about nameless, faceless people killing other nameless, faceless people. It's about little ones who get caught in a crossfire, or it's about doctors who go out in the streets. And tell us about the people you remember from that day. I think there was one boy in particular.
Well, I think what I'd like to say first is that I think there's such a misunderstanding about the war in Syria, because since it's been called a civil war, I think everyone imagines it's half the population killing the other half, and it is not. Yeah. This is state-sponsored mass murder and oppression. It's a war on civilians, not a civilian war. You know what I mean? And as a result, the civilians, children and doctors and nurses and everyone else have been the ones who've been paying the price. So during this time, I was in one of the hospitals, the one that you'd seen, which doesn't really look like a hospital, right? Because it wasn't really. It was a house we had converted into a hospital. And suddenly I just felt like I was on some sort of Hollywood stage. Yeah. It was such an apocalyptic sight, with all these severely burnt children coming in, from a 10-year-old up to a 17-year-old. And we had no idea what it was. They were all covered in this thick white powder dust and walking in like zombies. You know that really famous picture of the Vietnamese girl who'd been napalmed because it was like an incendiary weapon. It was like a ball of fire that came down on their schoolyard. And I'd just never seen anything like that in all my medical training. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking, but for me, the most devastating thing was that I had trained all my life for a day like that. I had the knowledge, I had the skill and ability to treat them, but I didn't have the resources that I needed. Yeah. You know what I mean? I should have been able to give them oxygen and sedation and painkillers and put breathing tubes down them and put them in a safe ambulance and take them to a hospital that can look after them. And instead, I had to send them in pain, suffocating in the back of their parents' cars to get them to safety. And 10 kids that died that day because I, who could have saved their lives, didn't have the tools I needed to do that. And that breaks my heart.
And sometimes it's the small things. I mean, there's a story in Eastern Ghouta this week about a rescue worker who's trying to save people, and he didn't have petrol. He didn't have gas. Because of the blockade, they can't actually turn the car on to go save people. And so sometimes we think we need these big miracles to make small changes, and we don't. It actually is about one doctor with the right equipment in the right place at the right time. And this is also very personal for you. And I think, you know, tell us about your family and the toll this has taken. I understand you've lost a number of members of your family in this war.
Yeah, and you know, and I'm the lucky one compared to so many. I mean, we have lost over 30 members of our family.
30.
Yeah, but and that was a really tough period that we went through back in 2012 and 2013. But I'm still so incredibly lucky compared to so many who've, you know, lost their parents or their children or their entire family. I remember actually, bizarrely, one of the most poignant days was when my cousin called me up crying, saying they've napalmed our fields. It was the fields that our fathers and their grandfathers and their fathers before that had, you know, tended for decades. Yeah. And he was like, they're all gone. And I just hadn't heard his voice crack like that and cry. It was that was a hard conversation.
Tell us about, you know, schools have been bombed indiscriminately and actually on purpose in this conflict. Mm-hmm. Clinics have been bombed. Have you seen healthcare be weaponized in this war?
It's not that I've seen it, is we have evidence. Yeah. And one of the incredible, frustrating things that has happened about Syria is that it's become a war of misinformation, and opinion seems to have replaced the truth. And facts appear to be not sacred anymore. You know, Physicians for Human Rights have documented over 400 attacks on hospitals and clinics. Over 800 of my colleagues have been killed, 40% of them by torture. 90% of these attacks have been by the Syrian regime, and the other 10% by other armed actors. And just since the beginning of this year, nearly 20 hospitals have been bombed out of existence. Yeah. So this is a systematic obliteration of healthcare and using it as a weapon of war. Our hospitals have become places where you go to die, not go to live.
Well, the thing is, it's incredibly effective, because if you want to have an impact, who do you get? You get the people who can save other people.
Right.
And so there's something that's so very sinister about that. But I also want to go back to the hope, because honestly, when you come, I was joking, I did a series of briefings on Capitol Hill after a trip to Syria, and I said I was actually so much more depressed in Northwest Washington than in Northwest Syria. You know, because the level of hopelessness that you see on the ground in Washington actually feels in some ways much more tangible than in Syria, because people are getting on with it no matter what, and I think that resilience is often lost. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me about what you have done, because very to the point of resilience, there was a children's hospital that was bombed 6 times. Mm-hmm. Some of us, myself included, might have given up at that point, but you didn't. Tell us about what you did. So when besieged Aleppo was being bombed, this was last November, I'd got a message to say they've just bombed 5 hospitals in that weekend, and I honestly felt so devastated. I'd just spent years trying to rebuild with my colleagues and friends, and I was bloody furious. And so after spending a couple of days crying, I realized that was really unhelpful. And wanted a good start, but unhelpful.
Yeah. I wanted to do something that was that could transform our collective anger into something meaningful. Yeah. And I knew that I wanted to not just rebuild in the way that I've always done it, which is you go begging for money and then you get on with it. I wanted something that everyone can contribute to. And so we launched the People's Convoy campaign, and it was a campaign to crowdfund to rebuild a whole children's hospital. And I wanted to take the equipment for the hospital all the way from London to Syria to deliver it to our partners, IDA. And it was something that I wanted people to be part of, except we had 12 days to do it before Christmas, and everyone thought I had absolutely lost my mind, including myself. But we did it, you know, like 5,000 people from over 10 countries raised $350,000 in just 12 days, and off we went on Convoy, and we took the hospital equipment, and 3 months later, Hope Hospital opened its doors. I think You know, I think so many people want to get involved. So many people want to do something. They want action, right? Like words is, you know, we can sit here and go, oh, it's really bad. But, you know, what people want to be involved in doing something. And when you're doing something direct to the heart, and you can see what your money is doing. And, you know, this hospital has already treated 15,000 children. So, yeah, I think they're incredible, you know. They wanted to rebuild for the 7th time. Who am I to say, nah?
And that hospital is still standing.
Yes. Yes, it is.
That experience must have taught you a little bit about the aid model, because inevitably you must get asked constantly, and I even get asked regularly, what can I do? What can I do? Because the human instinct is to help. So many moms read those stories and say, I want to make a difference, what do I do? And you're giving them away. Tell us what you're doing to localize. Everybody's talking about the whole locavore movement. I mean, you're really trying to localize how you help people.
So, yeah, my experience, like a lot of things when you come up close and personal, is much uglier than you think. I'd realized through all the work I was doing how much the Syrian charities were doing a lot of the work. In fact, the data shows we're doing 75% of the humanitarian work in Syria, but we're getting 0.3% of the funding. So we're doing 3/4 of the work and not even getting 1% of the funding. And that's why I had that situation where I was there with the kids and I couldn't treat them. We're not getting the money. And this is not just the situation in Syria. This is happening literally across all of the crises of the world. It's the local humanitarians who bear the burden of the response, but are getting 1 to 2%. So there's been a recognition across the whole sector. There was the first World Humanitarian Summit, and they said, right, by 2020, 25% of the aid budget should go to local humanitarians. But of course, it's just a lot of talk. And so I thought, what the hell, let's just give it a go and see if we can do better, because I really believe we can do better. So, so I set up Can Do 18 months ago. We're 8 women. Who are taking on the humanitarian system. And
where are the 8 women? Tell us where they're located.
So we're in Dubai, Egypt, Syria, the UK, Malta, and so we really want to do something that connects everyone. I believe we're all humanitarians. If you give a shit and you want to help your fellow human being, then you're a humanitarian. You don't have to be in the charity sector. So we want to connect you to these local, trusted, impactful humanitarians. So we've set up a crowdfunding platform so that we can give them the opportunity to tell you what their healthcare needs are, and then connect them to you around the world, who will hopefully be able to provide these resources. And I'm going to keep pushing the policymakers and the decision makers for everyone to localize their humanitarian response, because this is not just a problem in Syria. This is happening across the world, and millions are suffering needlessly because of it.
Tell us the name of the organization again.
Can Do.
Can Do. Can Do. And this is the idea, because it is all of the terrific aid organizations are doing great work. But what you're missing are the worker bees on the ground who are there making a difference day in and day out, night in and night out. And you really do see it. You see all of these people who aren't waiting for UN funds to cross their border, right? And you see people who are far from fancy rooms and light and power and water that comes from the tap making a difference.
Yeah, and also it's not just a case of they're the ones who are helping to save lives now, right? They're the ones who are going to still be there after the conflict is finished, right? You know, when you're coming to heal the communities and bring a peaceful, more better future, they're the ones who are going to do that. So it's enabling them now, and it's enabling them for the future. And you know, I'm constantly frustrated by the fact we don't learn lessons. You know, the lesson from the Ebola crisis was that if healthcare systems are destroyed in conflict and are not rebuilt, then these countries become hotbed exporters of disease, you know? And so we need help to rebuild our healthcare system, and that's what we're going to try and do, because otherwise, I can tell you now, the next Ebola crisis is going to come out of Syria. And even worse, it's, you know, when everyone is watching our hospitals being bombed and is okay with that, it is not going to be long before hospitals in other countries in Europe or America become a terrorist or a military target, because they have been given the green light. Hospitals are okay to bomb. And that is not acceptable, and that is our collective responsibility to say, no, we need to be upholding the Geneva Conventions.
And I think Syria has set a new definition for so many points, including what can be indiscriminately targeted. But I think what you're trying to do is say, let's set a different kind of standard, right? Let's actually use this as an opportunity to get resources to people who are making a difference on the ground. And just one sentence answer, which is, what is the difference that women are making on the ground in Syria?
Oh, huge. I mean, I think, unfortunately, Middle Eastern women are looked through one story in one single lens, and that's one of oppression. And not only is it one story, it is such a tiny picture of it. You know, we are there where the women who are now the widows who are looking after the heads of households, the grandmothers who are taking their children over dead bodies to get them to safety, the doctors, the fearless journalists. We are there not just fighting the patriarchy, we're not only fighting prejudice, but we're trying to do it while dodging bombs and bullets. And I'd love the powerful women in this room to help us to change that perspective and stand up with us. There is hope.
There is hope. And on that note, I want to thank you, Dr. Rola Hallam. And I also want to thank all of you, because this can be a topic that feels like too much, and I hope we've given you something to have heart and hope around as you think about the power of healing to make a difference in some really difficult circumstances.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.